Hey, beautiful souls. Welcome back to my channel. I'm Sarah, and today I'm sharing the most painful and ultimately empowering story of my life. This isn't just about family drama. This is about surviving narcissistic abuse, breaking generational trauma, and discovering that sometimes the people who are supposed to protect us are our greatest enemies. Before we begin, please know this story contains mentions of child abuse, emotional manipulation, and kidnapping. If any of these topics are triggering for you, please take care of yourself first. My earliest memory isn't of birthdays or Christmas mornings. It's of being 8 years old, standing in our pristine Chicago kitchen, watching my mother Linda's face transform from loving to monstrous because I'd accidentally dropped a glass of milk. "Sarah Elizabeth Morrison," she said, her voice deadly calm. "What have you done?" The glass had shattered across the spotless white tile floor, milk spreading like evidence of my failure. I remember my small hands shaking as I bent to clean it up, apologizing over and over. But Linda, I can't call her mom anymore, not after everything. Linda had other plans. She grabbed a bar of soap from the kitchen sink. Not just any soap, but the industrial-strength Dawn dish soap we used for the greasiest pans. "This will teach you to be more careful," she whispered, her manicured nails digging into my jaw as she forced my mouth open. The taste was horrific, bitter, chemical, burning. But worse than the soap was watching her face as she did it. There was no anger there, just cold satisfaction. Like she was checking off a task on her daily to-do list. She made me stand there with the soap in my mouth for 20 minutes while she cleaned up the milk. Then she sent me to my room with soiled sheets from last time I'd been sick. Sheets she deliberately left unwashed until black mold started growing on them. "You'll sleep on these until you learn to appreciate cleanliness," she said, closing the door. This wasn't a one-time incident. This was my childhood in the affluent suburbs of Winnetka, Illinois, where appearances mattered more than truth, and Linda Morrison was the picture of maternal perfection to everyone except me. You see, Linda was what psychologists call a covert narcissist. To the outside world, she was the devoted single mother, the woman who'd been abandoned by my father when I was young. She volunteered at school fundraisers, hosted elegant dinner parties, and always dressed impeccably. Our house on Elm Street was featured in Better Homes and Gardens twice, but behind closed doors, I lived in terror. If I brought home anything less than perfect grades, and by perfect, I mean 100% or higher with extra credit, she would light a match in front of my face. Just hold it there, watching me flinch, watching my eyes water from the smoke. "This is what failure looks like," she'd say. Hot, dangerous, consuming everything it touches. When the matches stopped making me cry, when I'd learned to school my expression into blankness, she escalated. She'd bring the flame close to my hair, close enough that I could smell the singeing. "Fear is healthy," she'd whisper. "It keeps you motivated." The food restrictions started when I was 11. Linda would prepare elaborate meals, roasted chicken, garlic mashed potatoes, green bean casserole, and serve them beautifully on our fine china. Then she'd place a single slice of stale bread in front of me. "Growing girls need to learn portion control," she'd say, cutting into her perfectly seasoned chicken. "You wouldn't want to become fat and unlovable like your father." Every other day, if I was lucky, I'd get a real meal, but it was always conditional. Perfect behavior, perfect grades, perfect compliance earned me the right to eat. I learned to hide food in my room. Crackers from school lunch, apples I'd slip into my backpack. I became an expert at eating slowly, making every bite last, because I never knew when the next meal would come. But perhaps the cruelest punishment was the isolation. Linda had a walk-in closet off the master bedroom, spacious enough for her extensive wardrobe, but when those doors closed, it became a prison. Any infraction, any sign of the normal defiance that healthy children show, would earn me hours in that closet. Sometimes 6 hours, sometimes 8. I'd sit among her designer clothes, breathing in the overwhelming scent of her perfume, listening to her move around the house, living her life as if I didn't exist. The longest time was 12 hours. I was 14, and I dared to question why I couldn't go to a friend's birthday party like other kids. Linda's response was swift and merciless. "Ungrateful children need time to think about their blessings," she said, locking the door. By hour 10, I was begging. By hour 12, I was promising to be perfect, to never question her again, to be the daughter she deserved. When she finally opened the door, I collapsed into her arms, thanking her for teaching me this important lesson. That's what trauma bonding looks like. Beautiful souls. The person who hurts you becomes the only person who can comfort you, and your survival depends on earning their approval. Pause for impact. School should have been my refuge, but Linda was too smart for that. She knew exactly how to present herself to teachers, counselors, and other parents. She was the room mom, the fundraising committee chair, the woman everyone admired for doing such a beautiful job raising Sarah all by herself. Sarah can be difficult, she'd confide to my teachers with perfect maternal concern. She's been acting out since her father left. I'm just trying to provide structure and love, but it's so challenging. So when I showed up to school exhausted from a night of punishments, when I flinched at sudden movements, when I hoarded food from lunch, the adults around me saw a troubled child with a devoted mother who was doing her best in difficult circumstances. My fourth grade teacher, Mrs. Patterson, pulled me aside once after I'd fallen asleep at my desk. "Honey, is everything okay at home?" she asked gently. For a moment, I considered telling her everything. But then I remembered Linda's warnings. "If you ever lie about me to strangers, if you ever embarrass our family, the consequences will be worse than anything you can imagine." "I'm fine," I whispered, "just tired from studying." Mrs. Patterson smiled and patted my shoulder. "Your mother says you're quite the perfectionist. That's wonderful, sweetie, but don't forget to get enough sleep." Voice hardening with resolve. The breaking point came when I was 16. I'd been accepted to Northwestern University early admission with a full scholarship. My grades and test scores were impeccable, forged in the crucible of Linda's demands for perfection. I thought she'd be proud. Instead, she was furious. "You think you're better than me," she accused, cornering me in the kitchen where so many of my punishments had begun. "You think you can just leave me here and start some new life." "Mom, it's a good school. It's an opportunity." The slap came so fast I didn't see it coming. My cheek burned, but worse was the look in her eyes. Pure rage. "I sacrificed everything for you," she hissed. "My youth, my beauty, my chances at happiness. You owe me your life, Sarah, your entire life." That night, she locked me in the closet with no food or water. But this time was different. This time, instead of breaking down, instead of begging for forgiveness, I made a plan. I had my driver's license. I had a small savings account from babysitting jobs Linda didn't know about. And I had something I'd never had before. A clear vision of a life beyond these walls. Music swells with hope. 3 days later, while Linda was at her book club meeting, I packed everything I could fit in 2 suitcases and drove to my father's apartment in Milwaukee. David Morrison was a broken man. That much was true. At 52, he weighed close to 400 pounds and struggled with basic self-care. His small apartment was cluttered and smelled of takeout containers and depression. But when I showed up at his door with my suitcases and tear-stained face, he took me in without question. "I should have done this years ago," he said, his voice thick with guilt and sorrow. "I should have protected you. Living with Dad wasn't easy. He needed help with everything: cooking, cleaning, managing his diabetes medication. But compared to Linda's house of horrors, his cluttered apartment felt like paradise. For the first time in my life, I could eat when I was hungry. I could sleep without fear. I could breathe. Dad never asked for details about what had happened at Linda's house, but I could see the knowledge in his eyes. The way he flinched when I startled at sudden sounds. The way he made sure there was always food available. The way he never, ever raised his voice. Tender moment. "Sarah," he said one evening as I helped him organize his medications. "I know I failed you. I know I let her take you when I should have fought harder. But I want you to know you're safe now. Whatever happened before, it's over." I spent my senior year of high school living with Dad, commuting to my old school, avoiding Linda at all costs. She called constantly, left voicemails that ranged from tearful apologies to rage-filled threats. But I never answered. Dad died 2 months after I graduated from high school. Massive heart attack in his sleep. The doctors said it was years of poor health, but I knew better. David Morrison died of a broken heart, carrying the guilt of leaving his daughter with a monster. Voice breaking. He left me everything he had: his life insurance, his savings, the title to his old Honda, about $45,000 total, enough to pay for my first year at Northwestern and give me a chance at the life he'd always wanted me to have. At his funeral, Linda showed up in a dramatic black dress, sobbing for the cameras, playing the role of the grieving ex-wife. "If only we could have worked things out for Sarah's sake," she wailed to anyone who would listen. I stood on the other side of the grave, 18 years old and completely alone, watching her performance with new eyes. For the first time, I saw her for what she truly was: a sad, broken woman whose only source of power came from controlling and destroying others. That day, I made myself a promise. I would build a life so full of love and purpose that her darkness could never touch it again. Transition music. I threw myself into college, into building the life I dreamed of during those long hours in the closet. I studied pre-law, graduated summa cum laude, and went on to become a successful paralegal at one of Chicago's most prestigious firms. By the time I was 28, I had everything I'd ever wanted. A beautiful apartment in Lincoln Park, a reliable income, and most importantly, I was about to marry the love of my life. Music becomes romantic. James Mitchell was everything Linda had taught me I didn't deserve. Kind, patient, successful, and completely devoted to me. We met at a coffee shop near my office. He was a software engineer working for a startup, and I was grabbing my usual afternoon latte. He was tall, dark-haired, with gentle brown eyes and a smile that made my heart skip. When he asked for my number, I almost said no out of habit. I wasn't used to good things happening to me. But something about James felt different, safe. Our first date was at a small Italian restaurant in Little Italy. I was nervous, jumpy every time the waiter approached our table. When James noticed and asked if I was okay, I almost made up an excuse. Instead, I told him the truth. I have some trust issues, I said. Family stuff. I'm working on it, but sometimes I get anxious in certain situations. James didn't push for details. He didn't make jokes about crazy ex-girlfriends or family drama. He simply reached across the table and took my hand. "We'll take it slow," he said. "Whatever you need." Romantic pause? That was James. Patient, understanding, willing to let me heal at my own pace. When I had nightmares, he held me without asking questions. When I hoarded food in our apartment, he gently showed me that our pantry was always full. When I flinched at sudden movements, he made his presence known before entering a room. He never tried to fix me or push me to get over my past. He just loved me, consistently and unconditionally, until I began to believe I was worthy of that love. We dated for 3 years before he proposed. By then, I had told him everything about Linda. The abuse, the manipulation, the reason I was so careful about keeping our relationship private. "She's toxic," I explained. "If she finds out about you, about us, she'll try to destroy it. It's what she does." James listened to every word, his jaw tightening with protective anger. "She can't hurt you anymore," he said firmly. "You're not that little girl in the closet. You're strong, you're safe, and you're loved." Voice filled with love, our wedding was small and perfect. Just our closest friends, James's family, who had embraced me completely, and my chosen family, the people who had supported me through college and beyond. Linda wasn't invited. I'd changed my name, moved apartments twice, and done everything possible to keep my new life separate from my past. For 5 beautiful years, it worked. James and I built a life together in a cozy house in Oak Park. We traveled, we laughed, we made plans for the future. I finally understood what safety felt like, what unconditional love could be. I should have known it was too good to last. It was a Tuesday in March when my past came knocking on my door, literally. I was working from home that day, catching up on case files in my comfortable office overlooking our back garden. James had left for work that morning with his usual kiss goodbye, promising to pick up Thai food on his way home. The doorbell rang at 2:47 p.m. I remember the exact time because I was in the middle of reviewing a contract with a strict deadline. Through the peephole, I saw her. Linda Morrison, now 58 years old, standing on my porch with 2 black garbage bags at her feet and tears streaming down her face. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. It was like seeing a ghost, a nightmare stepping out of my past and into my carefully constructed new life. She looked older, smaller somehow, but her eyes were the same. Those calculating eyes that had watched me suffer for so many years. "Please," she called through the door. "Sarah, honey, I know you're in there. I just need to talk to you." My hand hovered over the deadbolt. Every instinct screamed at me to call the police, to pretend I wasn't home, to do anything except open that door. But then she started crying harder, her small frame shaking with what appeared to be genuine despair. "I have nowhere else to go," she sobbed. "I'm so sorry, baby. I'm so sorry for everything. Please, I just need help." Pause for dramatic effect. Against every rational thought in my head, I opened the door. Linda looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes, her perfectly styled hair disheveled, her expensive clothes wrinkled. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. "You look so beautiful," she whispered. "So grown up and successful. I'm so proud of you." The words I'd craved as a child, the approval I'd nearly died trying to earn, and now they felt like poison. "What are you doing here?" I asked, keeping the door mostly closed. "How did you find me?" "I hired a private investigator," she admitted. "I know that sounds invasive, but Sarah, I'm your mother. I had to know you were okay." Voice hardening. She proceeded to tell me a story that sounded almost believable. She'd been living with her friend Margaret in Florida for the past few years, trying to work on herself and become the mother I should have been. But Margaret had grown tired of Linda's promises to contribute financially, and when Linda had spent their last $3,000 on online gambling, Margaret had given her an ultimatum: find a job and start paying rent, or find somewhere else to live. "I tried, Sarah," Linda insisted. "I really tried to change, but I'm 58 years old and I haven't worked in years. No one will hire me. Margaret gave me a week to figure it out, and when I couldn't..." She gestured helplessly at the garbage bags. "I know I don't deserve your help," she continued. "I know I was a terrible mother, but you're all I have left." Conflicted pause. Standing there, looking at this broken woman who claimed to be my mother, I felt a confusing mix of emotions. Anger, yes. Fear, definitely. But also something I hadn't expected. Pity. This was the monster who had terrorized my childhood? This small, desperate woman with tears streaming down her face? "Sarah?" James's voice came from behind me. He'd come home early and was looking at the scene with confusion and growing concern. Linda's eyes lit up with interest as she took in James's appearance. Tall, handsome, obviously successful based on his business attire. "You must be the husband," she said, switching on a charm I remembered from her performances for teachers and neighbors. "I'm Linda Morrison, Sarah's mother. I know Sarah has probably told you terrible things about me, but I'm hoping we can start fresh." James looked at me, reading the terror in my eyes, the way my body had gone rigid. "Sarah's told me enough," he said coolly. "What do you want?" Linda's manipulation begins. Linda's face crumpled with fresh tears. "I know I failed as a mother. I know I have a lot to make up for. But I've been working on myself, going to therapy, trying to understand why I was so difficult. When Sarah was young, she was good. I had to give her that. Even I almost believed her. I lost my housing," she continued. "I'm essentially homeless. I know it's not Sarah's responsibility to help me, but I was hoping, maybe just for a few days, until I can figure something out." James and I exchanged looks. I could see the conflict in his eyes. As someone from a loving, functional family, the idea of turning away a parent in need was almost unthinkable to him. "We should talk about this privately," he said to me. "Of course," Linda said quickly. "I'll just wait here on the porch. Take all the time you need." Internal conflict? James and I went into the kitchen, leaving Linda outside with her bags. "Sarah, what do you want to do?" he asked gently. What did I want to do? Part of me wanted to call the police and get a restraining order. But another part of me, the part that was still that little girl desperate for her mother's approval, wondered if Linda might actually have changed. "She looks different," I admitted. "Older, more fragile. Maybe she really has been in therapy. Maybe what? Maybe this is my chance to get closure, to see if there's any possibility of having a normal relationship with her." James took my hands in his. "Baby, after everything she did to you, you don't owe her anything. If you want her gone, I'll make sure she leaves and never comes back." The protective fury in his voice made my heart swell with love, but it also crystallized my decision. "I want to try," I said, "but with conditions, strict conditions." The fatal decision. I went back to the porch where Linda was waiting patiently, her hands folded in her lap like a chastened child. "You can stay for 1 week," I said, "in the guest room, but there are rules." Linda nodded eagerly. "Of course, whatever you need. First, you follow our household schedule. James and I both work, and we need our space and quiet time respected." "Absolutely." "Second, you contribute to household expenses and chores while you're here. I'll do whatever I can to help. Third, if I ever feel uncomfortable or unsafe, you leave immediately. No arguments, no negotiations. That's completely fair." Ominous undertone. As Linda gathered her garbage bags and followed me into our beautiful home, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the March weather. What I didn't know was that I had just invited a predator into my sanctuary. Linda hadn't changed. She had simply gotten better at hiding her true nature. And she was about to launch the most diabolical plan of her life. Music builds tension. The first 2 days were almost pleasant. Linda was helpful, quiet, respectful of our space. She cooked meals and didn't restrict my portions, cleaned the house without being asked, and spoke to both James and me with what seemed like genuine warmth. She complimented our home, our relationship, our life together. She asked thoughtful questions about my work and James's career. She seemed interested in our friends, our routines, our plans for the future. "You've built such a beautiful life," she told me as we sat in the living room after dinner on her second night. "I'm so proud of the woman you've become." For a moment, I allowed myself to hope. Maybe people really could change. Maybe all those years of therapy and self-reflection had actually worked. Maybe I finally had the mother I'd always wanted. Voice turns dark. I should have paid closer attention to the questions she was asking. About James's work schedule, about our neighbors, about our security system. I should have noticed how she seemed to be memorizing every detail of our life. But I was too caught up in the fantasy of redemption, too hopeful that this broken woman might actually love me the way I'd always needed her to. On the third day, James didn't come home from work. Pause for impact. I called his cell phone at 6:30 p.m. when he was 30 minutes late. James was never late without calling. It was one of the thoughtful habits that made him such a wonderful husband. The call went straight to voicemail. I tried again at 7 p.m. voicemail. By 7:30 p.m., I was pacing the kitchen while Linda sat at the table, calmly reading a magazine as if nothing was wrong. "Should I be worried?" I asked her. "This isn't like James." Linda looked up with an expression of mild concern. "I'm sure he just got caught up at work. You know how dedicated he is." Something in her tone made me look at her more closely. There was no real worry in her eyes, just satisfaction, growing dread. I called James's office. His assistant, Maria, answered on the second ring. "Oh, hi, Sarah. James left around 3:00 p.m. today. He said he had a family matter to attend to." My blood ran cold. "A family matter?" "Yes, something about meeting with your mother to discuss." She paused, sounding confused. "Actually, he seemed kind of upset. Is everything okay?" I hung up without answering and turned to face Linda, who was still reading her magazine with infuriating calm. "Where is he?" I demanded. Linda looked up with innocent eyes. "Where is who, dear?" "James, you know something about where James is." She set down her magazine and regarded me with the same cold calculation I remembered from childhood. "Sit down, Sarah. We need to have a conversation." The mask comes off. I remained standing. "Tell me where my husband is, right now." Linda sighed as if I were being unreasonably difficult. "James was very concerned when I told him about your collection." "What collection?" "The weapons, dear. The little arsenal you've been building in our bedroom closet." My mind reeled. "What weapons? Linda, what are you talking about?" She smiled then, and it was like watching a snake reveal its fangs. "The handgun is registered in your name, of course." James was quite upset to learn about it, especially when I explained how you'd been practicing at the shooting range, talking about wanting to eliminate threats to our happiness. Realization dawning? The handgun. James had insisted I get it after our neighbor's house was broken into last year. He'd taken me to the shooting range exactly once to learn how to use it properly. Then it had sat locked in our bedroom safe, untouched. But Linda had been in our house for 3 days. She'd had plenty of time to go through our things, to discover details she could twist into something sinister. "James doesn't believe you," I said, but doubt was already creeping in. "He knows me. He knows I would never—" "Doesn't he?" Linda interrupted. "James was quite worried when I told him about the rules you'd been making for me, about how you'd been treating me, about how much you reminded me of, well, myself at your age." The psychological warfare begins. She stood up then, moving with the predatory grace I remembered from childhood. "James cares about you, Sarah. That's why he agreed to meet with me privately, to discuss getting you the help you need." "You're lying." "Am I? Think about it. How much of your past have you actually shared with James? How much does he really know about what you're capable of when pushed?" The questions hit like physical blows. James knew some of my history, but I'd been careful to protect him from the worst details. I'd never wanted him to see me as damaged, as the product of Linda's careful conditioning. Now I realized that silence had created the perfect opportunity for Linda to fill in the gaps with her own twisted narrative. Voice cracking. "Where is he, Linda?" Her smile widened. "Safe, for now. But Sarah, darling, I'm afraid his safety depends entirely on your cooperation." The room spun around me. This couldn't be happening. Not to James, not because of me. "What do you want?" I whispered. Linda moved closer, her voice dropping to the intimate tone she'd used when delivering punishments in my childhood. "I want what was always mine," she said. "I want my life back, my daughter back, my chance at the happiness that was stolen from me." The plan revealed. You see, Sarah, I've been doing research about your father's estate, about the property he inherited from his father, about the trust fund that should have come to you when you turned 21. I stared at her in confusion. There is no trust fund. Dad left me his savings and the insurance money. That's it. Is it? Because according to county records, your grandfather owned quite a bit of land in Wisconsin. Valuable land that's now worth millions in development rights. She was delusional. Had to be. Dad had never mentioned any family property, any inheritance beyond what he'd left me. But Linda's confidence was absolute, her belief unshakable. In her mind, there was a fortune that rightfully belonged to her, and she was going to do whatever it took to claim it. A voice hardening with resolve. Even if that were true, I said, it would be mine, not yours. Linda laughed, the same cold sound I remembered from childhood. Oh, sweetheart, after the stories I've told James about your mental state, after the evidence I've planted about your instability, do you really think anyone will believe you're competent to handle a large inheritance? The full scope of her plan became clear. She hadn't just randomly shown up at my door. She'd been planning this for months, maybe years. The sob story about Margaret, the homelessness, the desperate need for help, all of it designed to get her inside our home, inside our life, where she could gather information and plant seeds of doubt. I'm going to call the police, I said, reaching for my phone. And tell them what? That your elderly mother is visiting and you're worried about your husband who left of his own free will to meet with her? She was right, and we both knew it. James had left work voluntarily. He'd told his assistant he was handling a family matter. There was no evidence of foul play, no proof of coercion. Just a concerned mother trying to help her troubled daughter, and a loving husband who'd gone to meet with her privately. The trap closes? Here's what's going to happen, Linda said, settling back into her chair as if she were discussing dinner plans. You're going to continue being the perfect hostess while I stay here and conduct some research into your father's estate. James will remain my guest until I've found what I'm looking for. And if I refuse? Her eyes glittered with malice. Then James will have a tragic accident, the kind that happens to people who stick their noses where they don't belong. The casual way she said it, like she was commenting on the weather, made my blood freeze. This was the Linda I remembered, the woman who could threaten unthinkable violence while maintaining perfect composure. Voice breaking. You won't get away with this. Won't I? Sarah, darling, I've had years to plan this, years to prepare for every contingency. Do you really think your amateur attempts at resistance will stop me? She stood and walked to the window, looking out at our quiet street with proprietary satisfaction. Besides, she added softly, deep down, you know you deserve this. All those years of hating me, of blaming me for your problems, of living this perfect life while I struggled. You owe me this much. Music builds to crescendo. That night, I lay awake in the bed I'd shared with James for 5 years, staring at the ceiling and trying to figure out how to save the man I loved from the monster I'd brought into our home. Outside my bedroom window, I could hear Linda moving around the house, opening drawers, rifling through papers, making herself completely at home in the life I'd worked so hard to build. Tomorrow would bring new horrors, new manipulations, new threats. But tonight, lying in the darkness, I made myself a promise. I was not that terrified child anymore. I was not helpless. I was not alone. And I would find a way to make Linda Morrison pay for every cruel thing she had ever done. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every creak of the house settling, every sound from downstairs made my heart race. Was Linda going through more of our things? Planning her next move? Or worse, was she in contact with whoever was holding James? By 6 a.m., I couldn't stand it anymore. I got up, showered, and dressed for work as if this were a normal day. Because that's what I had to do. Maintain the facade while I figured out how to save my husband. Linda was in the kitchen when I came downstairs, humming softly as she prepared breakfast. She'd made coffee, scrambled eggs, and toast, serving everything on our good china as if we were celebrating something special. Good morning, darling, she said brightly. I thought we'd have a nice breakfast together before you head to work. I stared at her, this woman who'd threatened my husband's life 12 hours earlier, now playing the role of the devoted mother. I'm not hungry, I said. Nonsense. You need to keep your strength up. We have a busy day ahead of us. Forced normalcy. She set a plate in front of me with eggs, toast cut into triangles the way she used to do when I was little, and fresh orange juice in a crystal glass. For a moment, the domesticity of it was almost surreal. If someone had walked into our kitchen at that moment, they would have seen a loving mother and daughter sharing breakfast. They wouldn't have seen the invisible chains binding me to my chair, the fear coursing through my veins, the desperate calculations running through my mind. "About yesterday," Linda said conversationally, adding cream to her coffee. "I want you to know that James is perfectly safe. I'm not a monster, Sarah. I just need your cooperation." "Prove it," I said. "Let me talk to him." Linda tisked disapprovingly. "Trust, darling. Relationships are built on trust. James trusted me enough to meet with me privately. Now I need you to trust that I'll keep him safe as long as you're reasonable." The investigation begins. I forced myself to eat a few bites, knowing I'd need energy for whatever came next. Then I gathered my purse and headed for the door. "Where are you going?" Linda asked. "Work like always." "Of course, maintain your routine. That's very wise." Something in her tone made me pause. "You want me to go to work?" "Sarah, I'm not going to keep you prisoner in your own home. I just need you to understand that James's well-being depends on your choices. Make good choices." The office, building a case. At my office downtown, I went through the motions of normalcy while my mind raced. I needed help, but Linda was right. I couldn't go to the police with the story as it stood. A husband voluntarily leaving to meet with his mother-in-law wasn't kidnapping. An elderly woman staying in her daughter's home wasn't a hostage situation. I needed evidence, proof of what Linda was really doing. During my lunch break, I drove to the electronics store and purchased 3 small wireless cameras, the kind used for home security monitoring. The sales associate showed me how to set them up to record to cloud storage, how to monitor them remotely from my phone. "Great for keeping an eye on things while you're at work," he said cheerfully. If only he knew. Setting the trap. That evening, Linda made dinner again. Pot roast with vegetables, perfectly seasoned and beautifully presented. We ate in near silence, both of us playing our roles. "I've been thinking about tomorrow," she said as we finished the meal. "I'd like to visit some of the places your father used to go. Maybe his old bank, the lawyer who handled his estate. To get a better understanding of his affairs. His affairs are settled. Everything he had, he left to me." "Are you certain? Sometimes these things are complicated, especially when family members don't communicate well." I forced myself to nod agreeably. "Of course, if you think it's important. I knew you'd understand. You always were such a smart girl when you applied yourself." Surveillance begins. After Linda went to her room for the night, I quickly installed the cameras. One in the living room, positioned to capture the main seating area where she seemed to spend most of her time. One in the kitchen, aimed at the table where she ate and made phone calls. And one in the hallway outside the guest room, to monitor her movements. The cameras were small, easily hidden among our normal home decor. Unless Linda was specifically looking for surveillance equipment, she'd never notice them. Then I waited. First breakthrough. At 2:17 a.m., the motion alert on my phone woke me. I opened the app and watched as Linda crept out of the guest room, moved through the hall, and entered our home office. She spent 45 minutes in there, going through files, photographing documents with her phone, accessing our home computer. I watched her work with methodical efficiency, clearly following some predetermined plan. When she finally returned to her room, I made careful notes of everything I'd observed. The timestamps, her actions, the files she'd accessed. But more importantly, I had proof that Linda Morrison wasn't the helpless, homeless mother she pretended to be. She was conducting organized surveillance and intelligence gathering in my home. More evidence. The next day brought more disturbing revelations. At 3:00 a.m., Linda used our landline to make a phone call. The camera captured audio, though I couldn't make out the words clearly. But her body language was animated, aggressive. She was arguing with someone. At 4:30 a.m., she went outside. The cameras couldn't follow her there, but I could see her through the front window, walking down our street with purposeful strides. She returned 45 minutes later, looking satisfied. Building the case? Each day, Linda maintained her facade of the concerned mother, while I gathered evidence of her true activities. The late-night phone calls, the secret outings, the systematic investigation of our personal information. But I still didn't know where James was, and without that crucial piece of information, the police would be unlikely to take my concerns seriously. On Friday night, exactly 1 week after Linda's arrival, I made my decision. I was going to follow her. The tale begins. At 11:47 p.m., Linda left the house. I gave her a 2-minute head start, then grabbed my car keys and followed at a distance. She walked through our neighborhood with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where she was going. Past the Miller's house with their yapping terrier, past the corner where teenagers sometimes gathered, past the small park where James and I liked to jog on weekends. She walked for 23 minutes, finally stopping at a 24-hour storage facility on the outskirts of our suburb. The storage facility. The facility was surrounded by chain-link fencing, with electronic gates that required access codes. From my hiding spot across the street, I watched Linda punch in a code and walk purposefully through the rows of storage units. She stopped at Unit 247, produced a key from her pocket, and disappeared inside. A few minutes later, a light appeared inside the unit. My heart pounded as I realized what I was seeing. This wasn't just Linda conducting research into my father's estate. This was a base of operations, a planned, organized criminal enterprise. And somewhere inside that storage unit might be my husband. The rescue plan? I couldn't approach the facility that night. Linda might see me, and I needed more information before I made any moves. But I'd found her secret location, and that was a crucial breakthrough. The next morning, I called in sick to work and spent the day researching the storage facility. I learned about their security measures, their access procedures, their camera systems. More importantly, I called 3 people I trusted implicitly, people who had known me before Linda, people who would believe my story and help me save James. Assembling the team. First, I called Emma Rodriguez, my college roommate and best friend. Emma was now a social worker in Chicago, specializing in domestic violence cases. If anyone understood the psychology of family abuse, it was Emma. "Sarah, oh my God," she said when I explained the situation. "This is exactly what you warned me about. Linda is following classic abuser patterns: isolation, control, escalation to violence when other methods fail." Next, I called Trevor Kim, James's best friend since elementary school and our best man. Trevor was a Chicago police detective, though he worked in cybercrime rather than kidnapping cases. "This is fucked up," Trevor said bluntly when I finished my explanation. "But Sarah, we need hard evidence before we involve my colleagues. The cameras are good, but we need to prove James is being held against his will." Finally, I called Marcus Thompson, James's business partner and our neighbor. Marcus was a former Marine, and if we needed to physically extract James from wherever Linda was keeping him, his military training would be invaluable. "We're going to get him back," Marcus promised, "whatever it takes." The plan. That evening, my 3 allies gathered in our living room while Linda was out on one of her mysterious errands. I showed them the camera footage, explained Linda's behavioral patterns, and laid out what I suspected about the storage facility. "We need to get inside that unit," Trevor said. "If James is there, we call in backup immediately. If he's not, we at least gather evidence of Linda's criminal activities." Emma was more cautious. "What if this makes things worse for James? What if Linda has contingency plans?" "She definitely has contingency plans," I agreed. "That's why we have to be smart about this." Marcus studied the facility layout on my laptop. The fence is about 8 feet high with barbed wire, but there's a dumpster on the north side that could give us access. The real question is the security cameras. Trevor pulled up the facility's website on his phone. Basic setup: motion-activated cameras at the entrance and main walkways, but probably nothing covering individual units. If we approach from the back and move carefully, we should be able to reach Unit 247 without triggering any alerts. The mission. We decided to go that very night. Linda typically left the house around midnight for her mysterious activities, giving us a window of opportunity. At 11:30 p.m., she gathered her purse and headed for the door. "I'll be back late," she called to me. "Don't wait up." "Be safe," I replied, my voice steady despite my racing heart. 20 minutes later, Emma, Trevor, Marcus, and I were crouched behind trees across from the storage facility, watching Linda's small figure disappear into the maze of storage units. "Okay," Trevor whispered. "We give her 10 minutes to get settled, then we go in." The infiltration. The facility was eerily quiet at midnight, illuminated only by scattered security lights that created deep pools of shadow between the rows of units. Marcus had brought bolt cutters and lockpicks from his Marine kit, while Trevor carried a small camera to document anything we found. Getting over the fence was easier than expected. The dumpster Marcus had identified provided perfect access, and we dropped into the facility grounds without triggering any obvious alarms. Unit 247 was in the back corner of the facility, exactly where I'd seen Linda disappear earlier. As we approached, I could see a faint light leaking from under the roll-up door, and I could hear voices. The discovery. "Please," a man's voice said. Weak, exhausted, but unmistakably James. "I don't know anything about inheritance money. I've told you everything I know about Sarah's family." My heart nearly stopped. James was alive, but he sounded terrible. Dehydrated, possibly injured. "You're lying," Linda's voice replied, sharp with frustration. David Morrison inherited land from his father. Valuable land. The money from that inheritance should have gone to Sarah, and therefore to me as her next of kin. "There is no land." James's voice was stronger now, fed by desperation. "Sarah inherited David's house and about $45,000 in savings. That's it. There's no secret fortune. Then why won't she give me what I deserve? Linda shrieked, her carefully maintained composure finally cracking. Why does she get to live in luxury while I struggle? The team moves in. Trevor was already on his phone, texting his contacts at the police department with our location and requesting immediate backup. Marcus positioned himself at the facility entrance to guide the officers to our location when they arrived. Emma and I crept closer to the storage unit, trying to get a better view through the gap under the door. What I saw made me gasp. James was tied to a chair in the center of the unit, his face gaunt and bruised, his clothes dirty and torn. Linda stood over him with a kitchen knife in her hand, her face twisted with rage. But worse than Linda's obvious intent to harm James was what I could see in the shadows behind them. The horrifying truth. The storage unit wasn't just a temporary holding place. Linda had set it up as a long-term base of operations, complete with sleeping bags, camping supplies, and boxes of documents she'd clearly been accumulating for months. On one wall, she'd created a detailed map of our neighborhood, with photos of our house, our daily routines, James's work schedule. Red string connected various elements like something from a conspiracy thriller. But the most chilling sight was a small table covered with legal documents, papers that appeared to be related to power of attorney, mental health commitments, and property transfers. Linda hadn't just planned to kidnap James and extort money from me. She'd planned to have me declared mentally incompetent, gain control of my assets, and disappear with everything I'd worked to build. The final confrontation begins. I couldn't wait for the police. James was in immediate danger, and Linda's mental state was deteriorating rapidly. Against every rational thought in my head, I stood up and walked directly to the storage unit door. Linda, I called out. It's Sarah. I know you're in there. Let's talk. The voices inside stopped abruptly. Sarah? Linda's voice was suspicious. How did you find me? I followed you. Like you taught me to do when I was little. Always be aware of your surroundings. I heard movement inside the unit, then the sound of the roll-up door beginning to open. Linda appeared in the opening, the knife still in her hand, her face a mask of cold fury. You always were too clever for your own good, she said. Behind her, I could see James looking up at me with a mixture of relief and terror. He was trying to mouth something. A warning, I realized. The trap is sprung. I brought what you want, I said, holding up a manila envelope. The documentation about Dad's property, the trust fund information you were looking for. Linda's eyes widened with greed and triumph. I knew it. I knew David was hiding money from me. It's all here. Bank account numbers, property deeds, everything. But I need to see James first. I need to know he's okay before I hand this over. Linda stepped aside, gesturing me into the storage unit with the knife. Come in, darling. Let's finish this as a family. Music builds to climax. As I stepped into that storage unit, into the trap Linda had so carefully constructed, I knew that the next few minutes would determine everything. Whether James lived or died, whether Linda finally faced justice for her crimes, whether the cycle of abuse that had defined my life would finally, permanently end. I was terrified, but I was also ready. Intense, climactic music. The inside of the storage unit was even more disturbing than what I'd glimpsed from outside. Linda had essentially created a bunker. Camping chairs, a battery-powered lantern, coolers of food and water, and detailed maps and photographs covering every wall. But the most chilling sight was James himself. My strong, confident husband looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past week. His face was pale and drawn, with dark circles under his eyes and a cut on his cheekbone that looked infected. His wrists were raw from rope burns, and I could see he'd lost weight, but his eyes were alert and focused on me with desperate love. Sarah, he whispered, I'm so sorry. I should have listened to you about her. Shh, Linda snapped. No talking without permission. The envelope gambit. I held up the manila envelope again, making sure Linda could see its thickness. This is everything, I said. Dad's will, the property surveys, the bank statements showing where the trust fund money was deposited, everything you've been looking for. Linda's eyes locked onto the envelope with laser focus. I could almost see her mental calculations. Finally, the fortune she believed she deserved. Show me, she demanded. I opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of official-looking documents. What Linda didn't know was that these were actually copies of my law firm's client agreements, property disputes, and contract negotiations. Legal documents that looked impressive but had nothing to do with hidden inheritance money. Because there was no hidden inheritance money. There never had been. Playing for time? This first page is the original trust document, I said, holding up a contract for a commercial lease. Grandpa Morrison established it in 1987, but Dad couldn't access it until certain conditions were met. Linda moved closer, squinting at the document in the dim light. What conditions? His daughter had to reach age 25 and demonstrate financial stability. That's why Dad never told me about it. He died before I met the requirements. I was making it up as I went along, but Linda was so desperate to believe in this fantasy that she accepted every word. How much? She breathed. Including the land development rights in Wisconsin? About $2.8 million. The beautiful lie? Linda's face transformed with pure greed. All her carefully constructed plans, all her manipulations were leading to this moment, the payoff she felt the world owed her. Where is it now? She demanded. In a trust account at Northern Trust Bank downtown. But Linda, there's a problem. Her expression sharpened. What problem? The trust specifies that if I die or am declared mentally incompetent, the money goes to charity, not to next of kin. It was Grandpa's way of making sure the family money went to someone who could handle it responsibly. I watched the implications sink in. Linda had planned to have me committed or worse, but either option would result in her losing the fortune she believed existed. That's not possible, she stammered. It's all in the documents, I said, gesturing to the fake papers. But there is a way around it. The proposal? Linda leaned forward eagerly. What way? A voluntary transfer. If I willingly assign power of attorney and transfer the funds, the charity clause doesn't apply. But it has to be completely voluntary. No coercion, no threats, no suggestion of mental instability. I could see her mind working, recalculating her entire plan. So if you just give me the money, then you get everything. Dad's money, Grandpa's money, all of it. But Linda, I need something from you first. Her eyes narrowed suspiciously. What? I need to know that James is safe. That you'll let him go once I sign the transfer papers. The negotiation? Linda looked between me and James, weighing her options. She was so close to what she wanted, but the knife in her hand suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. How do I know you won't change your mind? She asked. How do I know you won't call the police once James is free? Because I love him more than I hate you, I said simply. If giving you money keeps him safe, then that's what I'll do. For a moment, something almost human flickered in Linda's eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by the cold calculation I knew so well. Here's what we're going to do, she said. We're all going to drive to the bank tomorrow morning. You're going to make the transfer in person, and once I confirm the money is in my account, I'll let James go. The bank is closed tomorrow. It's Saturday. Then Monday. We wait until Monday. The stalling tactic. 2 more days. I needed to keep both James and myself alive for 2 more days, while hopefully giving Trevor and Marcus time to coordinate with the police. Okay, I agreed. But Linda, James needs medical attention. That cut on his face looks infected and he's dehydrated. He's fine. He's not fine. And if he dies before Monday, the police will investigate. They'll ask questions about why you were the last person to see him alive. The bank transfer will never happen. Linda considered this, her maternal instincts warring with her greed. Greed won. Fine, but you stay here with me. Insurance that you don't change your mind. What followed were the longest 36 hours of my life. Linda allowed me to give James water and clean his wounds with supplies from her camping gear, but she never put down the knife, never relaxed her vigilance. She made me call in sick to work, claiming I had food poisoning. She had me text Trevor, Emma, and Marcus, saying I was taking care of James, who had come down with the flu. All the while she talked about her childhood, her marriage to my father, her belief that life owed her more than she'd received. You don't understand what it was like, she said as we sat in the cramped storage unit on Saturday night. I was beautiful once. I had opportunities. But then I got pregnant with you, and David made me give up everything. According to Linda's version of history, she'd been an aspiring actress in Chicago when she met my father. She'd given up her dreams to become a wife and mother, only to watch my father's drinking and depression destroy their marriage. I tried to be a good mother, she insisted, but you were such a difficult child, always crying, always demanding attention. I did my best with the tools I had. The tools she had, as if starving a child, threatening them with fire and locking them in closets were simply parenting strategies rather than systematic abuse. I know you think I was cruel, she continued, but I was trying to teach you resilience, to prepare you for a world that wouldn't coddle you. James listened to all of this with growing horror. This was his first exposure to the reality of my childhood, and I could see him beginning to understand the depth of trauma Linda had inflicted. On Sunday night, as Linda dozed fitfully in her camping chair, James managed to whisper to me, Sarah, there's something I need to tell you. When she first contacted me, she didn't just talk about you. She had information about your father's death. My blood ran cold. What kind of information? She said it wasn't suicide. She said someone helped him along. I stared at James in shock. My father had died of a heart attack in his sleep. At least that's what the death certificate said. But he'd been severely depressed, and I'd always wondered. She's lying, I whispered. She has to be lying. But even as I said it, doubt crept in. Linda had shown up in my life with detailed knowledge of my father's estate, with plans to claim inheritance money that didn't exist. How far back did her manipulations go? Monday morning arrived gray and drizzly, matching my mood perfectly. Linda had been awake since dawn, checking and rechecking the fake documents, planning every detail of our trip to the bank. She'd agreed to let James come with us. She needed him to look normal and healthy, to avoid raising suspicions. But she'd made it clear that any attempt to signal for help would result in immediate and permanent consequences. Remember, she said as she untied James from the chair, we're just a happy family conducting some routine banking business. Everyone smiles, everyone cooperates, everyone goes home safely. What Linda didn't know was that I'd been in contact with Trevor throughout the weekend, using a code we'd established back in college. Text messages that looked like casual updates, but actually contained vital information about our location, Linda's mental state, and the timing of the bank visit. I'd also used my law firm's resources to prepare one final surprise. As we walked into Northern Trust Bank that Monday morning, Linda between James and me with the knife concealed in her purse, I knew that the next hour would determine everything. The lobby was busy with typical Monday morning banking activity. Customers waiting in line, tellers processing transactions, the general bustle of financial business. Linda approached the customer service desk with the confidence of someone conducting legitimate business. I need to make a large transfer from a trust account, she announced. The customer service representative, a young man named David, looked at the documents Linda presented with growing confusion. Ma'am, I'm not sure I understand. These appear to be legal contracts, not banking documents. Linda's face began to flush. No, these are the trust papers, the inheritance documents. David politely reviewed each page, his expression becoming more puzzled. I'm sorry, but I don't see any Northern Trust account numbers or trust identifications. These seem to be related to commercial real estate leasing. I watched Linda's careful composure begin to crack as the truth became unavoidable. There was no trust fund. There was no inheritance. There was no $2.8 million. You're lying, Linda shrieked at the bewildered bank employee. She has the money. I know she has the money. Other customers turned to stare as Linda's voice rose. Security guards began moving in our direction. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to lower your voice, David said calmly. But Linda was beyond reason now. The fantasy she'd built her entire plan around was crumbling, and with it, her grip on reality. She owes me, Linda screamed, pointing at me with shaking fingers. She owes me everything. I sacrificed my life for her. The final confrontation, that's when Linda made her fatal mistake. In her rage and desperation, she pulled the knife from her purse, waving it in the air as she continued her tirade about money and sacrifice and everything she deserved. The security guards reacted immediately, but I was faster. All those years of living in fear, all that time spent calculating Linda's moods and preparing for her violence, had given me one advantage. I knew her patterns better than anyone. As Linda raised the knife, I stepped forward instead of back, grabbing her wrist and twisting until she dropped the weapon. It's over, Linda, I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. It's finally over. The bank's security team subdued Linda while customers screamed and scattered. Within minutes, Chicago police arrived, led by Trevor and his colleagues who'd been monitoring the situation from the parking lot. As they handcuffed Linda, she looked at me with pure hatred. This isn't over, she hissed. You can't escape what you are. You'll always be my daughter. But for the first time in my life, her words had no power over me. No, I said calmly. I'm not your daughter. I'm the woman who survived you. Linda Morrison was charged with kidnapping, extortion, terroristic threats, and weapons violations. During the investigation, police discovered the storage unit contained evidence of months of premeditation, including detailed surveillance of my family and plans to have me declared mentally incompetent. She was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. James recovered from his physical injuries, though the emotional trauma took longer to heal. For both of us, the experience was a terrifying reminder of how quickly our safe, normal life could be disrupted by the ghosts of my past. but it was also liberating. For the first time, James truly understood what I'd survived as a child. Not just the stories I'd told him, but the lived reality of being raised by a woman capable of systematic psychological and physical torture. "I'm so sorry," he said as we sat in our living room the night after Linda's sentencing. "I'm sorry I didn't understand how dangerous she was. I'm sorry I met with her alone." "You couldn't have known," I replied. "Linda is very good at presenting herself as a victim. It's one of her most dangerous skills." We spent the next several months in intensive therapy, both individually and as a couple, learning to process trauma, to recognize manipulation tactics, to build new patterns of trust and communication. We sold our house in Oak Park. It never felt safe again after Linda's invasion. We bought a new place in a different suburb with a security system and no forwarding address for anyone from my past. I changed my name legally, dropping Morrison entirely and taking James's surname. Sarah Mitchell felt like a new identity, a fresh start, a life that Linda could never touch. But the most important change was internal. For 30 years, I'd carried the weight of Linda's abuse, the fear that I might somehow deserve the treatment she'd given me, the worry that I was fundamentally damaged by her cruelty. Watching her in that courtroom, listening to her continue to blame me for her choices even as she faced prison time, I finally understood the truth. Linda Morrison was a sick woman who had used her position as my mother to abuse and manipulate me for her own psychological gratification. Nothing I had done as a child deserved that treatment. Nothing I could do as an adult would ever be enough to satisfy her need for control and revenge. I was not responsible for her choices. I was only responsible for my own. Today, 5 years later, James and I have built a beautiful life together. We're expecting our first child, a daughter we plan to raise with all the love and security I never had. Sometimes I think about Linda, sitting in her prison cell, still convinced that the world owes her something, still believing that if she could just manipulate the right people, say the right words, she could claim the life she feels was stolen from her. But her power over me is completely broken. The terrified child who once cowered in closets is gone, replaced by a strong woman who fought back and won. To anyone watching this who recognizes their own story and mine, you are not alone. Narcissistic abuse is real, family trauma is real, and the cycle can be broken. It takes courage to walk away from toxic family members, even when they're your parents. It takes strength to rebuild your life from the ground up. It takes time to learn that you deserve love, respect, and safety. But it's possible. I'm living proof that it's possible. Your abuser's power over you exists only as long as you believe it does. The moment you truly understand that their words are lies, that their version of reality is twisted, that you deserve better than the treatment they gave you, that's the moment you become free. Linda Morrison thought she could destroy my life by taking away my husband, my sense of safety, my belief in my own worth. Instead, she gave me the greatest gift possible, final, complete proof that I am stronger than her worst intentions, braver than her greatest fears, and more capable of love than she ever was. The little girl who once trembled in the darkness of a locked closet grew up to face down her monster and win. And if I can do it, so can you. It's been 5 years since Linda was sentenced, and as I'm recording this epilogue, I'm sitting in the nursery we just finished for our daughter, due next month. James is downstairs making dinner. He's become an excellent cook, partly because he knows how much it means to me to have someone lovingly prepare food without conditions or punishments attached. The woman who once starved her own child will never meet her granddaughter. That was an easy decision to make. People often ask me how I've moved on from such severe trauma. The answer is slowly, with lots of therapy, and with the understanding that healing isn't linear. Some days I wake up feeling powerful and grateful for everything I've overcome. Other days, I hear a certain tone of voice or see a news story about child abuse, and I'm temporarily transported back to that frightened little girl. But the difference now is that I have tools to manage those moments. I have James, who understands and supports my healing journey. I have therapists who specialize in family trauma. I have friends who believe my story and validate my experiences. Most importantly, I have myself, the woman I chose to become despite everything Linda tried to make me. For anyone who sees themselves in my story, please know these things. You are not crazy. Trust your memories, trust your instincts, trust your experiences. Narcissistic abusers are experts at making their victims doubt reality. You are not responsible for your abuser's behavior. No child deserves abuse, regardless of their personality, their needs, or their responses to trauma. You deserve love and respect, not conditional love based on perfect behavior, but unconditional love based on your inherent worth as a human being. Cutting contact with toxic family members is not only acceptable, it's often necessary for healing. Blood relation doesn't give anyone the right to abuse you. Breaking the cycle of abuse doesn't just heal you, it protects future generations. Our daughter will never know what it's like to live in fear of a parent's mood swings. She'll never doubt her worth based on someone else's conditional approval. She'll grow up knowing she's loved simply because she exists, not because she's perfect or useful or convenient. That's perhaps the greatest victory over Linda Morrison I could ever achieve. Final thoughts. Recovery from severe abuse is possible, but it's not easy. It requires courage, support, and often professional help. There are no shortcuts, and there's no timeline that works for everyone. But the alternative, staying trapped in patterns of fear and self-doubt, is so much worse than the hard work of healing. To my fellow survivors, your story matters. Your pain was real, your strength is remarkable, and your future can be everything you dreamed of during your darkest moments. To the family and friends of survivors, believe them, support them, be patient with their healing process. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is simply witnessing their truth without trying to fix or minimize it. Thank you. Thank you for listening to my story, even though I know it was difficult. Thank you for caring about the experiences of abuse survivors. Thank you for being part of the community that makes healing possible. If this video has helped even one person feel less alone in their experience, then sharing my most painful memories has been worth it. You are stronger than you know. You deserve better than you received. And you have the power to create the life you want, regardless of where you started. Final dedication. This video is dedicated to every child who has ever been hurt by the people who were supposed to protect them, and to every adult who chose to break the cycle of abuse rather than continue it. We are the ones who transform pain into purpose, trauma into triumph, and survival into service to others who need hope. Our stories matter, our healing matters, our courage to speak up matters. And Linda Morrison, wherever you are, whatever lies you're telling yourself in that prison cell, your power over me is finished. I am free.